What is the difference between a GS4 drive's Volts Hertz and sensorless vector motor control modes, and which one should you use? Let's look at Volts Hertz first. One of the cool things you can do with the GS4 drive is you can modify the Volts Hertz curve to suit your application's needs. It defaults to the usual straight line voltage frequency curve, or you can change it to high starting torque, fans and pumps, make your own custom curve, or use one of the power curves, all of which optimizes the drive's output, which saves you money. You can use it to control multiple motors at the same time. Since the Volts Hertz doesn't require any tuning, though it is recommended, it's super easy to set up and use. Just enter the motor parameters and go. Volts Hertz can be used with pretty much any inexpensive three-phase AC induction motor. Now, the downside of Volts Hertz control is if the load does increase, the motor will slow down because the drive has no way of knowing what the motor is doing. It just blindly pumps out voltage and frequency it thinks the motor needs to run and just assumes the motor will do what it's told. And Volts Hertz can typically only control a motor down to around 2 to 3% of its max frequency, which for an 1800 RPM motor means a Volts Hertz drive really can't control the motor below around 30 to 50 RPM. Bottom line, a drive configured for Volts Hertz mode is ideal for centrifugal pumps, HVAC blowers, etc. Pretty much whenever you don't really care if the motor's running at exactly the right speed, you don't expect varying loads, and you just want to move some stuff. A sensorless vector drive isn't really sensorless, it just doesn't have an external sensor. Instead, it monitors the current of each phase of the motor and uses that to detect what the motor's doing and reacts accordingly, which gets you tighter speed control under varying loads, higher starting torque up to 200% of the rated torque, and lower speed operation, typically down to 1% of the max rated frequency. You will want to tune a drive, but that only takes a few seconds using the GS4's built-in auto-tune feature. Sensorless drives can be used with inexpensive AC induction motors, but if you plan to run the motor at very low frequencies, then you really want a motor specifically designed for variable frequency drive use. Why? Because the general purpose motors are typically fan-cooled. If the motor is running at a low speed, then the fan won't cool enough, and it will either burn up or at a minimum greatly reduce its lifespan. Motors designed for variable frequency drives, we call those inverter duty motors, have heavy-duty insulation and thermal properties designed to prevent the overheating issues. For example, this general purpose motor has an insulation class of F, while this inverter duty motor is class H. Those are NEMA insulation class designations, and we see that the class H buys you another 45 degrees of operating range. Well, that's the difference between going outside on a 60-degree day and a 100-degree day. Big difference, right? Also, the rotor on an inverter duty motor is specifically designed to maximize the drive's ability to accurately monitor the induced current. And because sensorless vector's monitoring and controlling the current on a single motor's windings, it can only control one motor at a time. So any application where you need tight speed control and lower frequencies would be ideal for the sensorless vector control mode. Things like printing, textiles, CNC spindles, etc. Now, you can do simple feedback control with both of these control modes using the GS4 drive's built-in PLC and/or PID functionality, which we cover in other videos. But those are for monitoring things like fluid levels, temperature, pressure, things like that, not for monitoring motor speed. Well, that ought to be enough to get you started. Click here to learn more about the GS4 drive. Click here to learn about Automation Direct's free support options, and click here to subscribe to Automation Direct's YouTube channel so you will be notified when we publish new videos.